If you are a beginner violinist and you feel like you are practicing but not really improving, then don't worry because you're not alone. A lot of beginners work so hard, but their practice habits are not so good. And because of that, their progress is usually super slow. So today I want to talk about the 3 most common mistakes that beginners do in their practice and also how to solve them. Hi there, my name is Francisca Portugal. I'm a professional violinist working in residency orchestra in Den Haag, in the Netherlands, and I'm also a violin teacher both online and in person. So if you are new to this channel and you are interested in violin practice tips, technical advice, and ways to improve your playing, then make sure to stick around and subscribe. The first big mistakes that beginners usually do is to practice inconsistently. And a lot of people say that practicing quality is the most important thing. And that's completely true. But also, if you never practice, then what's the point of having a super good practice? Without consistency, practice becomes impossible. For example, practicing once a week for like an hour is way worse than practicing just 15 minutes every day. And that's because as a beginner, you are just learning so many new things. You are learning your posture, you are learning how to make sound, you are learning your left hand. There's so much new information. And if you think that in only 1 hour per week, everything is going to be solved, well, I tell you it's not. You need to create habits in your practice so that you repeat these things a lot more times throughout the week. That's the only way to keep progressing as a beginner. And a lot of people complain,
"Oh, I don't have time for that. My life is too busy. I have so many things to do."
And although I believe that, there's always 50 minutes in your day. How many times you keep scrolling on Instagram or checking with your friends on Facebook or even watching a video on how to practice when you should actually be practicing? Truth is that you don't need more than 50 minutes a day, and everyone can take 15 minutes to practice violin. The question is how to make those 15 minutes a bit easier in your life. Well, I have some tips for you. The first tip I have for you is to actually schedule your practice sessions. In my case, I never do that because for me, practice already became an habit. I have to do it every day. I have to prepare every week new program for my orchestra. So I'm kind of forced to do that. But for those who are not forced, it's really hard to make a commitment to it. So by scheduling in your agenda, you actually make sure that you take every day a little time dedicated to violin. And I do this whenever I'm super busy apart from the orchestra and I have, for example, another concert, then I need to write something in my agenda because I know if I don't do that, it's very hard for me to take time and learn a new piece because most probably I will want to rest in my free time. So the way I do this is that I have a separate calendar in my Google Calendar only dedicated to practice. And the good thing about having a separate calendar is that you can just hide it or show it whenever you want. In that way, you can see it whenever you need, but it doesn't distract you from the real events in your life. Another possibility to make your practice a bit more convenient is, for example, to keep your violin outside its case. I wouldn't recommend that for anyone who has like a very expensive violin because it's not good to leave your violin in general outside. It can always happen some accidents, so we want to protect our violin at all costs. But if you just have a very cheap violin, then actually there's not a lot of problem to leave it just outside the case. In that way, whenever you arrive home and you are tired and you feel like practicing, just by looking at it, maybe it inspires you a bit. Maybe suddenly you feel like practicing again. And not only that, it's super convenient to have the violin already ready for you because then you already have the shoulder rest in place, your violin is there, your bow is also ready to play. So it just makes the process a bit easier for your life. The second biggest mistake is to have an inattentive practice. And one of the most common reasons for that is actually digital distractions. If you are practicing and you have your phone close by and you're just looking at it all the time, and then you use also your tablet and you get notifications from Instagram or something, then you're constantly distracted about all these things. So even though you only have 15 minutes now to practice, most of the time your mind is not going to be there. You're not going to feel present. So my advice is that you actually try to limit the digital distractions. Whenever I have to practice something really important, I try to avoid as much as possible to use my tablet for the scores. Because when you have sheet music, you are forced to just look at the sheet music and there is not a lot of different information around you. I also always put my phone in airplane mode or turned off and really far away from me because in that way I'm really focused in my practice. And there is also another thing that you can do. For example, instead of having an app to your metronome and tuner, you can just buy a digital one. And another problem that usually happens is to play in this autopilot mode. And that's when beginners are usually playing and they're not really listening. They are just playing for the sake of having fun and having a good time in their practice. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have a good time in your practice. All I mean is that practice should be fun, but we should never forget the real goal of practicing, which is to correct mistakes, which is to learn, which is to change your playing. solving. Because if you're just playing for the sake of it, then you're just performing, you are not really practicing. So whenever you practice, be active in searching for mistakes, be active in seeing how you're playing, in trying to change something in your playing. And that can make your practice much more fun, because if you are searching for mistakes, you are kind of forced to be creative. You have to actively search for something to happen. So try to think of your practice as a problem solving. The third big mistake is to have an inefficient practice. And think of the 15 minutes I talked before. If we only have the 15 minutes, then we want to take the most of our time. And one of the most common mistakes I see related to this is to start looping. Looping is when you start playing from beginning to end without really thinking about anything. You just play your piece, you arrive to the end, and you come back to the beginning, and there's not much happening right there. And the problem with this is that you're going to waste a lot of time instead of wasting very little time in just fixing very concrete mistakes. As humans, our ego always wants to avoid doing something bad. So most of the times, unconsciously, our brain will tell us, no, I don't want to play this part because it's just sounding off. But the trick is actually to contradict your brain and do what's wrong. Practice the mistake. Spotlight the parts that are not so good. In that way, your practice is going to be very focused on the mistake parts, and you're also going to save a lot of time in your practice. That's what effective practice means. It doesn't mean that you cannot ever play from beginning to end. It should mean that whenever something is not feeling right in your practice, that you should put a focus on that and then only later put it into context. Another big mistake I see is that beginners tend to not have silence in their practice. You need silence in order to think. If you are just playing all the time, you are unable to think on what to solve. Violin is already very hard by itself, and imagine if you are able to play and think at the same time, then you probably are a genius, because I cannot do that. So if most probably you can't as well, just take a time to think. You played something. There's something going on. There must be something to solve. So use that silence to analyze what you just did. Another way you can use the silence is by recording. Instead of just playing 3 times the same music, you can just, for instance, play once, beginning to end, record it, and use the silence to analyze the recording. In that way, the second time you repeat it, it will feel different because you want to change something. You also can use this silence to stretch, to release some tension from your body. Because I know a lot of times we tend to play, and whenever we are stuck or we feel tensed, we don't stop or we don't want to stop. So try to use the silence for that. You can also write some notes, for example. That will force you to really stop playing and think on what to solve next. So don't think as silence as a waste of time, because silence is in fact part of the process. So in the last part of this video, I would like to introduce you a short practice plan of 15 minutes that I often give to my students. We will divide it in 5 parts. So the first part of this plan is to warm up your sound. And there's plenty of things you can work here. I'm just gonna give you a few examples on what you can work, but it's up to you to decide and to pick your own routine. So what you can do is, for example, focus on having a very straight bow parallel to the bridge from beginning to end. Try to also use the full bow so that you really work out your sound. You can also try and work in different parts of the bow, for example. Also explore a bit on pressure and point of contact, which is the place where you place your bow in the string. And ideally you also want to use a mirror for this, so you can check how your bow is on the string. The second part of this practice is dedicated to our left hand. For this you can do scales, for example, or you can just do exercises. Anything that's gonna help you to work a bit more on the left hand. The third part of this practice is to dedicate it to your repertoire. So just take the piece you are working with your teacher and try to search for technique problems, but also try to apply a bit of musicality to it. Repertoire is where you can combine both things. So it's really nice for you to explore and try different dynamics, different bowings, different fingerings even. The fourth part of your practice is where you're going to perform. So after you practice your piece or your etude, you can just perform it one time from beginning to end. And whenever you do this performance mode, remember to record it, because that will lead you to step number 5, which is to analyze your recording and plan what you will practice for the following day. So after you record your performance, you will see that some things maybe didn't come through as you wanted, and that's perfect, because that gives you something to work on. So write those things down, listen carefully to your recording, and make a plan for the next day. In that way, this 15-minute routine is something that you can just do in a loop. You play, you perform, you record, you analyze. And you can do this literally every day. This for me is the best way to progress. Because by analyzing your recording, you are kind of being your own teacher. You are saying to yourself what you can do better. And by analyzing a recording, you will see that you'll start slowly to get a bit more conscious in your practice. You will maybe find the mistakes quicker, you'll maybe listen faster when something is out of tune. You start to become your own teacher. So if we practice always in these ways, you will see that you progress much quicker. So make sure to always have a consistent, attentive, and effective practice. I hope this will change a bit your routine and the mistakes that you maybe kept doing, and that it will just make you practice a bit more consciously. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Ciao, ciao!